I thought they have designated places though. I need it.
Good evening. This meeting is now convened at 5:03 p.m. I would like to ask everyone to please silence your cell phones. A quorum of the board members is present in the board auditorium. They are, from my right on the platform, Cassandra Ozanne Bandy, Michelle Cruz Arnold, Jeanette Garza Lindner, Angela Lamont Flowers, myself, Audrey Momanai, Rick Campo, Rolando Martinez, and Adam Ravon. Paul Mendoza will be joining us shortly. If there are any elected officials in the audience this evening, please stand and be recognized. I don't see anybody. We are now ready to hear from speakers who have registered to speak for today's workshop regarding Lone Star governance progress monitoring training. Public comment during school board meetings will only be available to those persons who have signed up to speak prior to the meeting time per current protocol. Verbal and other disruptions by persons during school board meetings are not acceptable, as they inhibit the board's ability to conduct business and the public's ability to observe those processes. Persons who participate in such behavior will be given one warning, and if behavior is repeated, they will be asked to leave the meeting. We have 27 registered speakers who will be limited to 2 minutes each per board policy. We ask that you stay on topic and refrain from naming individuals, especially students, as their identity is protected under the law, but you may name your own child. I ask that you please respect our procedures and the other speakers and end your comments promptly when your time has expired and the timer rings. If you're signed up to speak via Zoom, we must see you live with your camera on as you speak. Our first item held for registered speakers is our workshop topic, Lone Star Governance Progress Monitoring Training. We'll begin with speakers who are signed up to address the board in person. Will J. Allison Chapin please approach the microphone? This speaker will be followed by Anita Wadwa. Yes, ma'am, please go ahead.
I'd like to speak about a well-known Texas saying, God, family, country. God, my God led me to teaching. He sees into my heart, my eagerness to share the joy of learning, my dedication to making the world a better place for all, my desire to be the best for my students. What does your higher power see in your heart? Family comes next, immediate, extended, and humankind. I have the right to be with them, to help carry their burdens. Are you allowed this flexibility? Because HISD teachers and staff are not allowed. Maternity leave is not a given. Attendance threats and FMLA leave requests are being denied. Not to mention the amount of personal time school staff have to work without recognition or pay. Finally, my country. My parents raised civic-minded children. The American dream, equality for all, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country kind of stuff. Equity for all Houstonians served by fully funded public schools is something our forefathers believed in. Texans even wrote it into the state constitution. Are you truly serving our students well if some of the students are denied services? Keep democracy in the hands of the people, not in the billionaires or the servants they control. Join HFT or Community Voices for Public Education and join the fight against this tyranny. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Anita Wadwa. Is she here? Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead. The microphone's back there. This one's not set up yet.
Hi, I was just wondering who would be the right people to address questions to, because sometimes I have questions and I email board members and I don't get a response, and perhaps you're not the right people, but then who is the right person? Because some of the questions I have are not about, like my principal, he'll get back to me, or PTO. So if I have, and so example questions are, like, what is the attendance policy? There's so much rumors. I don't want to get enraged and proselytize about a rumor. I'd like to know, is there an attendance policy? If so, what is it? Are people denied FMLA? What's true, what's not? STAR, can parents opt out of STAR or not? There's a lot of confusion around TEA because I've opted my students out, my daughters out of STAR in the past, and now I'm getting the impression that you can't. Again, I don't know what is true and what's not true. And then also, I'm at Condit, and so how many schools are going to NES, and then what's happening to libraries? Are more librarians going to be cut? My daughter spoke to y'all a couple of weeks ago because she's very concerned about the library. And I'm very concerned about equity. It's just not good optics to be at a school with really wealthy families who we benefit from having them there. They donate a lot to the school. But I think that they would, this room would be packed if you tried to close their library down. So why do those kids of those families get a library, but these other students don't? So though, who do I talk to, and can you direct me if you can to the email?
So if you have a specific question that's been emailed to the board, it sounds like that's the case, then we'll get that to the right person within the district to respond to you via email. Also, if Carrie Briggs or somebody from your staff can just take note. Yep.
Just letting you know, because I haven't gotten a response back, so I'm just putting it on the radar. So
And just so you know, the board is very limited into what they can answer in the live meeting if it's not previously posted.
oh, I know they can't
So
respond. Sometimes I feel like I'm in an echo chamber, so I'm just trying to say, like, who do I talk to then? Because now this is not the forum for, back and forth. So.
Right, thank you. Okay, our next speaker is Sarah Rivlin, followed by Amy Kirshen, and then Michelle Williams. Ms. Rivlin, please go ahead.
I want to define student outcomes. For me, student outcomes means that my students are able to have a better life than their parents did. For Mike Miles and AJ Crable, student outcomes means STAR test scores. What a vapid definition. My cousin Nathan recently resigned from being the director of artificial intelligence at a major advertising firm. When I told him about Mike Miles's plan to spend $20 million on a program to teach AI to HISD kids, and to do so at the expense of our CTE programs, my cousin could not believe it. He said, "The trades are the only jobs that won't be replaced by AI. My work friend is learning welding for this very reason. Nobody knows what AI is going to look like a few years from now. Any education program that claims to be preparing kids for the future of AI is selling you something." Nathan spent his entire youth with a video camera in his hand making movies. His creativity is what propelled his career, not his AI experience. When it comes to student outcomes in HISD, what I want to see is that my kids are acquiring the skills needed for upward social mobility. 15 points on the STAR test does not mean upward social mobility. If a student is at the 15th percentile and is now at the 30th, that does not translate to upward social mobility. If they are at the 50th and are now at the 65th, that means nothing. Millard House invested in librarians and full-time fine arts and CTE teachers. Mike Miles is investing in multiple choice tests at the end of every class, which will amount to greater upward social mobility for our students. I pick the former.
Our next speaker is Amy Kirshen, followed by Michelle Williams. Ms. Kirshen?
Hello. My name is M.A. Kirshen, a first grade teacher, and I'm currently temporarily down to one eye, but I can see perfectly. To the extent of what's going on, what is not right in the classroom, the excessive paperwork, and the inability for me to use my paid time off for my condition is unacceptable, especially when I'm still sick. I'm still sick, yet I continue to go to work for fear of being fired for excessive absences. Taking off to take care of health is not an option in HISD anymore. And to add to my stress, my principal is in my room every day to make sure I read the script verbatim. Though it is harder for me to see out of one eye, I still read it with fidelity. If you want to help the students or be for students and teachers to strengthen our community, then I highly encourage you to participate in Houston's runoff and vote Sheila Jackson Lee.
Our next speaker is Michelle Williams, followed by Sarah Terrell, and then Placido Gomez. Ms. Williams, please go ahead.
I'm Michelle Williams for the Houston Education Association. Today I'm speaking on behalf of all the STAR test prep grade levels. Your constraint says that you want to reduce the number of DNF schools. Domain 1 is student achievement, Domain 2 is school progress, and Domain 3 is closing the gaps. I'm going to read the indicators under each one. Under Domain 3, academic achievement STAR performance that meets or above, progress in achieving English language proficiency, student success, a STAR component of student achievement. There's too much focus on NWEA. NWEA has no progress measure, period. So what's being neglected is your constraint, because this does not move test scores. Teachers move test scores. There's no focus in not any of HISD schools on STAR because the principals are out for self-preservation. Either they won't, can't, or focus on STAR because they are too focused on their own principals evaluation. We need STAR test prep. They're blocking all sorts of platforms that we need. We can't monitor how effective our interventions are. They even block code.org, which is free. It's free for students. It's run by a nonprofit that was vetted by the old administration. So I'm asking you all, if you're truly here to get HISD from under the state takeover, you need to pay more attention to what your constraints are and how they're being implemented in HISD. Because these teachers are running out of here because they cannot teach because of all of these rules and constraints with instruction. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Sarah Terrell, followed by Placido Gomez, and then Karina Quesada. Ms. Terrell, is she? Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
Lone Star governance is like a cookbook where the recipe itself is the product, not a meal, not food or happily fed people. Performance of all the recipe steps is the real objective. No more than X% of the meeting time can be spent on X subject. Check this box. You guys have 3 responsibilities. Hire and fire the superintendent, but TDA does that. Set policy for the district? I don't think so. Miles does that, and you guys just approve it. Oversee finances, but you're not doing that either. Miles tells you how much he has already spent, and you approve it. Despite promises of monthly updates, there's been no budget amendments since August when Miles revealed a $250 million overspend. NES requires layers of expensive micromanagers, and these are recurring costs. If 85 schools cost a $250 million over budget, then 150 will cost how much? About 190 million more. So after next year, the budget surplus will be almost gone. But what is Miles without our money? And what are you without Miles? Will you ensure that our budget is at least wisely spent? I guess not. Miles refuses any real accountability. He promises only a 1% increase in scores for this year and next. That's a truly appalling rate of return on our billion-dollar surplus. But the timing is perfect. Just as the higher, more aspirational goals of the out years loom, the money will run out. But we all met those 1% goals, so yay us. And we ticked every box on the Lone Star Governance checklist as well. But now, bye-bye.
Our next speaker is Placido Gomez. Sir, please go ahead.
Thank you. As a newly elected board member, I'll be taking notes about the training session. I want to learn as much as I can about what my role will be eventually when we switch places, which is what everybody in this room wants, including me, including you, including the superintendent. Though none of you are responsible for making the decision to ultimately take over the district, you're all nevertheless responsible for representing the vision and values of the community and dealing with the fact that many of us, including myself, feel a great deal of pain from effectively having a vote taken away. So one thing to mitigate that would be to strongly suggest you to think through how you could, put us to work as the elected board members, and think through, what we can do to help achieve the mission that everybody in this room wants. I also want to talk a little bit about real-time coaching, which is something that I've heard recently from not only a few teachers, but a friend of mine who's an assistant principal in a different district. One of the themes I've noticed in my own feedback to you time and time again is that good ideas can be poorly implemented sometimes. When I was a teacher, I had a great principal who gave effective real-time coaching, and what it looked like was I'd be teaching, there'd be a turn-in talk, and during the turn-in talk, after I was done talking, my principal would come give me a sticky note or whisper something about a student who I needed to address. It did not look like my principal interrupting me when I was talking, unless something was seriously going wrong with what I was doing. That's something as a teacher I'd have a serious issue with, and something that my assistant principal friend had a really difficult time talking to teachers about. And so I urge caution in the implementation of ideas that are good. In the past, I've heard many reports from teachers who have been snapped at by principals and have been communicated in a way that, to give you the benefit of the doubt, I imagine something that was not along the lines of what you would approve. So think about those things, please. Use us as board members, and also think through how ideas can be poorly implemented. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Karina Casada? No? Okay. We'll now hear from the remainder of our speakers on this topic who wish to address the board via Zoom. Ms. Smith, will you please identify and admit our speakers?
Sage Robert next.
Ms. Benzon, please turn your camera on. You may begin.
Hello. Hello, my name is Maria Benzon, and I'm an HISD parent and community leader. I'm here to speak about Lone Star Governance. Usually, before I speak at a board of managers meeting, I review what is available in the agenda and agenda packet. Then I do research so I'm informed and can comment appropriately. In the past, I've come to you with a thoughtful, prepared speech. Unfortunately, although the agenda was provided for the meeting, there was no agenda packet with reference materials to review. I emailed board services about the missing materials and never heard back. Considering that the board services staff have consistently been attentive to questions, it's peculiar that no agenda packet was ever posted and that no reply was given. Concerned citizens have been framed as uninformed agitators when we strive to be as informed as possible and to seek information even when it is unavailable or limited. This week, I am uninformed, but because you left me in the dark. But I'm resourceful and I did my own research. I found on the TEA website a Lone Star Governance Participants Manual with contributors such as Mike Morath and AJ Kravel. An important point I read is that student outcomes do not change until adult behaviors change. To that point, I wonder, what if adult behavior changes for the worse? Like, what if adults feel bullied and, like, in the cycle of trauma, they in turn become bullies in their jobs? How could we then expect student outcomes to improve? Please post agenda packet materials prior to future meetings. Thank you.
I think Adita Sage Bittner is next. Is she with you, ma'am?
Yes, 1 second.
Okay, thank you.
Hi.
What?
Can I start?
Yes, you could start.
Hi, my name is Adita Sage Bittner, and I am a fourth grader at Conda Elementary School. I am speaking about progress monitoring. Several of my family members are Jewish, and I wanted to wish you all a happy Hanukkah. If you didn't know, Hanukkah is a celebration of light over darkness and is represented by lighting candles on a menorah. I shared one of my Board of Managers speeches with my classmates at school because I was proud to be a voice for children at these meetings. Children should feel safe and able to make mistakes and learn from them at school. School should be a place of joy and inspiration. Many teachers try to meet us where we are and help us grow. Some teachers feel so much pressure to do what they are told. Many times they know that what they are doing is harmful to kids. For many, school has become a place of stress and anxiety. It feels like the focus is mainly on DOLs, test scores, class observations, and teacher absences. As you monitor these areas, please consider the many stories from teachers and students at board meetings and newspapers who express how frustrated and dehumanized they have felt since the HISD takeover. Today, I ask that you reflect on the meaning of Hanukkah. We need light and not darkness to make the world a better place. And when the light shines bright, we must address the good, bad, and questionable. Again, happy Hanukkah. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have one other speaker via Zoom.
Deidre Ariano, please turn your camera on. You may begin. Ms. Ariano, you may begin.
Thank you. I'm a member of the HISD graduating class of 1998. Every year around this time, we take our children to our old elementary, middle, and high schools and share our childhood experiences of favorite teachers and friends. This year, we have an opportunity to tell another story, one of unity between students, parents, teachers, and community members who join together as our once beloved district creates an exodus of hardworking teachers. Future generations will remember the harm enforced by the current TEA-appointed HISD superintendent and unelected board of managers. The legacy they leave behind is a rogue experiment of Destination 2035, emotional and psychologically abusive work and learning environments for students, teachers, and staff, and unlawful school ratings that attack the heart of our communities, which are the very schools we send our kids to day after day. According to TEA Commissioner Mike Morath, the TEA did not provide updates to the Texas State Board of Education because it does not have updates or reports of the current state of HISD under Mike Morath as of November. even after State Board of Education Representative Hickman requested updates or reports in August. Today, we see messages that go out to survey our communities regarding a bond in the near future. A bond under current poor management and administration will never get my approval. This may be the last public meeting at Hetty May for the year, but this is not the last time we speak out against unlawful takeovers of HISD by the Texas Education Agency.
Thank you. Our next item held for registered speakers is closed session A, deliberate the duties of the superintendent of schools, chief officers, assistant superintendents, principals, employees, and board members, evaluations of the superintendent, consideration of compensation and contractual provisions of the same. Will Ashton Morton please come to the microphone? The speaker will be followed by Jesse Heiner. Is Ashton Morton here? No. Jesse Heiner? No, I think that they're still setting it up. Thank you. Oh my.
Just make sure it's visible. Okay. In the last 6 months, oh, thank you, Michelle. In the last 6 months under Mr. Miles, public information requests show that at least 56 schools have experienced principal changes. 2 of these 56 campuses have actually experienced principal changes twice in just that short period of time. That 6-month number is higher than any 12-month period in HISD in the last 4 years, including COVID. We are averaging at least 1 principal change per week since the first day of school. Just last week, 2 more principal changes were announced, which will bring the total to at least 58 campuses experiencing principal changes. 2 non-NES campuses in my neighborhood lost highly effective principals this year. 1 was 3 days before school started, and 1 was 1 month after school started. Both campuses serve a 90% or higher population of economically disadvantaged students. The new principals at both of these campuses have no principal experience and a year or less of AP experience and only 4 weeks or less of experience in the principal academy. One of these campuses has lost at least 8 teachers. From my understanding, the count is now 9 since the first day of school. At an NES campus, my beloved elementary school, public information requests where the kids have to take cones like this to the bathroom. Public information requests show that in the first 2 months, just the first 2 months alone, our staff lost 8 members, including 1 special education teacher, 2 special education TAs, 2 third grade teachers, 2 second grade teachers, 2 counselors, 1 teacher apprentice, and 1 TA. Public information requests also showed that only 3 of these 8 positions were filled as of November 1st. Board members, I'm asking you today to stop giving Mr. Miles a yes vote to every single proposal he makes. We are losing educators left and right, and you are letting this happen. Mr. Miles.
Ma'am, thank you. Ma'am, thank you. Your time is up. Ma'am, thank you. We also have a thing, ma'am. A speaker on this topic who wishes to address the board via Zoom. Ms. Smith, can you please admit Melissa Yarborough? I think she's on. Please go ahead, ma'am.
Hi. At Navarro Middle School this week, teachers and students were informed that students are not allowed to use the restroom for the first 45 minutes of class. Que en la Escuela Navarro informaron esta semana a los maestros y a los estudiantes que los estudiantes solo tienen 45 minutos, perdón, no pueden usar el baño durante los primeros 45 minutos de la clase. But at Navarro, the classes are 65 minutes long. So that's 20 minutes at the end of each class in which students are allowed to go. And that means roughly 4 students per class period in a day with 6 periods. Students are not allowed to use the restroom during transitions or during lunch. Que las clases son de 65 minutos, entonces eso es solo 20 minutos por clase. en que los niños pueden usar el baño. Y eso es 4 alumnos por clase que pueden usar el baño en solo 6 clases en el día. Now, some students have classes like PE with 50 kids in it. Some have electives in social studies and science with 30 kids. And others are smaller, like English and math are about 20, 22 kids. So if you do the math, a child has about a 13% chance in any class or during the day to use the bathroom. And that's in a 7.75-hour day. Entonces, si ese alumno va a clase con muchos alumnos, puede ser entre 20 hasta 50 en sus clases, especialmente los electivos que son más grandes, ese niño tiene como 13% oportunidad de usar el baño en un día. That seems like a policy that shouldn't be passed down from above, but made at a campus level. The one-size-fits-all is simply not working, and it's not fair to students. Esta decisión no debe venir de arriba, debe ser una decisión al nivel de la escuela. No es justo para los alumnos.
Thank you, ma'am. Our last item held for registered speakers is closed session B. Consider and approve proposed appointments, reassignments, proposed terminations, suspensions, contract lengths, proposed non-renewals, renewals, and registrations, resignations, retirements of personnel, including teachers, assistant principals, chief officers, assistant superintendents, executive officers, and other administrators, and if necessary, approve waiver and release and compromise agreements. Will Sophie Grace Rojas please come to the microphone? The speaker will be followed by Analia Espinoza.
Hello, my name is Sophie Grace Rojas, and I made a story about my dream school. My dream school is a perfect school. It's so pretty, full of colors, and it has flowers, bushes, and it also has beautiful teachers, nice teachers, and there's less work in my school. There's no problems. Kids aren't falling asleep. Kids aren't crying because they only got an L in a grade. My school has what? I'm sorry. My school doesn't have a man who's named Mike Miles who's ruining my school. My school's perfect and unique. And everyone's happy. Anyway, do you know how many times I asked to go to the restroom and they say, "No, Sophie," after the DOL? We just got to the class and the DOL doesn't start until 30 minutes. You think I could hold it that long? Do you know how much work I have to do? I have 7 paper sheets and I also have to carry a cone to the restroom. Do you think that sounds fun? No! I don't want to carry a cone. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Analia Espinoza.
Hello, my name is Analia, and once again, I have a few things I want to say to you. Very recently within my school, I've been told that I would not be able to go home early after finals and instead are forced to stay at school despite students working their butts off. Despite my school not being NES, we're struggling because of the new policies being enforced. We're losing funding for school materials, mental health classes, and apps used for educational purposes. On top of that, timers are being enforced as well, and they have made a negative impact on not only me, but my friends. I come to school exhausted and overwhelmed with work, and as I look around me, everyone else seems the same. We're all tired, we're stressed, and with what's going on, it doesn't feel like it'll get better. You came into our district telling us you'll give us the help we need, but how do you know what we need when all you do is turn a blind eye to our protests and give in to your pride? On top of that, you now lied to the public saying you had nothing to do with preventing students from going to the bathroom during classes, despite multiple teachers claiming it was an enforced policy, to which has caused negative impacts on students' health. Another thing I want to add is, for some reason, you decided to replace a curriculum made by experts with a new one full of so many mistakes. Teachers are constantly having to fix it due to it being made by literal AI. Then you went so far as to fire professional and certified teachers with, and I find this a little funny, former employees of Chipotle, Starbucks, and Home Depot?
No experience with kids, nor is there any certification whatsoever, and still you're so confident in it that if it's not approved within 2 years, you claimed you should be fired? It's quite bold of you to assume we would want you here for that long. It's been 6 whole months. We've had to deal with you as our new superintendent, and every day there is some new chaos, some new decision being made for us. Let me be honest. I don't trust you. I really don't. In fact, I despise you for what you've done to the people around me, what you've done to our once perfectly made system that you burned to the ground the second you became someone of authority. I didn't want this. We didn't want this. So please do us a favor and leave our schools alone, leave our students alone, and most importantly, leave my sister alone. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Debbie Jane, followed by Lisa Robinson. Ms. Jane?
Yes.
Please go
Good
ahead.
evening, Superintendent Miles and Board of Managers. My name is Debbie Jane, and I am a teacher. I have worked with many dedicated and hardworking teachers and other school personnel over the last 26 years, and we deserve your respect. We also deserve your support in implementing the best practices, I repeat, the best practices in instructing our students in HISD and in assisting their families. What I have heard and witnessed this year, your policies fall very short. I'm also concerned about some of your proposals for the next District of Innovation. I find them inappropriate, improper, and, they seem to be illegal as well. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next speaker is Lisa Robinson, who will be followed by Jessica Campos. Ms. Robinson? Please go ahead, ma'am.
I'm a retired teacher and library staff. I'm here this evening to speak about unjustified teacher terminations and the growing wave of teacher resignations. When I was in the classroom and library, I rarely missed day at school. I did everything I could to be there because teaching fulfilled my life's work to create lifelong readers. I couldn't do that if I was absent. But you know what? Sometimes life happens. My biggest personal crisis while teaching was when my mom got sick with her final illness. I got the call and I had to go because guess what? Life happens. My principal told me not to worry, that the students would be all right. The other teachers were supportive as well. We made it work because that is what professional colleagues do. Fast forward to today's leave policies. 10 absences within the school year leads to automatic termination regardless of total available leave. All absences at 3 or more invokes a division-issued memo, which counts as a write-up. Where is the compassion in this policy? It's non-existent. There's no compassion, no collegiality, no empathy. There's only fear and inhumanity, which is leading to nonsensical chaos. Just because life happens, we are destroying teachers' careers and leaving classrooms without high-quality instruction. Board of Managers, do you want to be remembered as the board that oversaw the destruction of HISD through 1,000 cuts? Because that is where this is headed. Few teachers will stay in such a punitive atmosphere. Many will not even have the option to stay because they will have been terminated for having too many loved ones get sick, or they had to deal with a pesky appendix or a bad case of the flu. If the current leave policy had been in place during my mother's illness, I would have been written up or even terminated. Maybe I would have lucked out since my mom conveniently got sick at the end of the school year and passed away in June. But why should a teacher's job security depend on the timing of an illness? Please reconsider this alarming and unnecessary policy that is putting both our children's educational success and our teachers' livelihoods at risk.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next speaker is Jessica Campos, followed by Yvette Robles, and then Amber Mena Robles. Ms. Campos.
Voy a dar mi testimonio en español el día de hoy. Y también lo voy a traducir.
Hold on, just 1 second. So we
I
can
was
make
going
sure-
to also
Oh, you're gonna
translate
repeat
it.
Okay, very good.
So I'll be translating. I'm going to be speaking in Spanish today, and I'm going to be translating with myself. El día de hoy estoy aquí porque, bueno, yo los veo a ustedes y yo sé que ustedes me miran a mí como que soy una mamá loca, que no tengo nada que hacer, y se han de preguntar que ¿por qué está tan enojada esa mujer? So many of you guys might look at me and think, wow, this lady is crazy and she has nothing to do. Why is she so angry? Les voy a decir por qué estoy enojada. El enojo viene de dolor. El dolor que tengo de lo que ustedes están causando en nuestra comunidad. Anger comes from hurt, from pain. The pain that you guys are causing in our community is causing me pain. I'm angry. And let me tell you why I'm angry. Les voy a decir por qué estoy enojada. Porque hay mujeres en mi comunidad que son maestras, son doctoras. Oh, y también, I actually need more time since I'm translating. I would like the 4 minutes or the 3 minutes. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Las mujeres de mi comunidad, las mamás de mi comunidad son doctoras, enfermeras, maestras, pero son indocumentadas y no pueden sobrepasar eso. The women, the mothers in my community, the moms of my Girl Scouts, they're women that are undocumented, but they're doctors and they're lawyers and they're nurses. But here they come and they can't grow. We don't allow them to grow here because they're not from here. But they're no different from me. Ellos no son nada más diferente que yo. Lo único que tenemos diferente es que yo nací a este lado de la línea. The only difference that they have between us Americans and them is that they were born on the other side. That's the only difference. You guys don't understand the family lives that our children lead, where they're being stopped at every point from advancing. And you guys are not doing what's right. Lo que ustedes están haciendo, están participando en las mismas cosas que causan que el hispano se mantenga abajo. No nos están dejando crecer. You guys are participating in keeping the Hispanic and the black man down from allowing us to grow. And you're doing it with our children. And that's where I put a stop to it because that's my baby. These are my babies. And I'm teaching them right now that they should speak up for themselves because you guys don't know what it's like to live in our shoes. You guys have it good. Ustedes no saben cómo se siente vivir en nuestros zapatos donde no podemos avanzar porque ustedes no dejan que avancen.
Thank you, ma'am. Our next speaker is Yvette Robles. She's not here. I'm assuming Amber Mena Robles is not here. Okay. Brandy Dowda is our next speaker, followed by Diana Candida and Christina Acosta. Ms. Dowda, please go ahead.
All right, thank you. Good evening. My name is Brandy Dowda, and I am a teacher librarian. While my focus is on libraries, there are many overarching concerns that need to be addressed. It is alarming to me, as a proud Houstonian, born and raised here, in a city known for both its friendliness and its diversity, that these concerns must even be discussed. Separate is not equal. The Supreme Court decided this in 1954 in Brown versus the Board of Education. Why? In 2023, are valuable community resources being removed and policies and practices that, frankly, are shameful being implemented only in schools that serve primarily Black and brown students? Libraries, which serve not only students, but the community, and are staffed by teacher librarians, have been shuttered in favor of team centers. Students are heavily restricted in their bodily autonomy by restricting their restroom use. When they are permitted to go, they must carry traffic cones. Research has shown the importance and positive impact of certified teachers on test scores, as well as staffing consistency. Playing musical principals and firing teachers on a whim for daring to be human is not consistent with sound educational practice. Yet, these practices disproportionately affect schools in communities of color. If it wouldn't happen in River Oaks, why are you allowing it to happen in the 5th Ward? Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I'd also like to acknowledge Judith Cruz. Thank you for being here this evening. Our next speaker is Diana Candida. Yes, ma'am, please go ahead.
My name is Diana Candida. I'm here to speak on the agenda item regarding contract renewals and terminations. Like you board members, my son is not at an NAS or NESA school. Unlike you, though, I do not blindly believe what Mike Miles states. I'm here to fight for the parents, students, and teachers who are at the schools that are being disproportionately affected. Miles believes staffing isn't an issue and every student will get high-quality instruction every day. That won't happen with the current policies. Teachers are coming home stressed and crying, those with the most experience, compassion, and talent, and especially those who are most outspoken by standing up for themselves and their students are being reassigned, terminated, or are leaving. It will be difficult to replace them. This will have a profound effect on our children and our city now and in the future. The policies are logical. A friend of mine who teaches at an NES school was written up for taking 3 days off work that had been pre-approved. Teachers feel obliged to come in when they're ill to avoid being fired for excessive absences. Your policy demonstrates a lack of compassion for our hardworking teachers. In addition, students and other staff getting ill as a result is a real and likely consequence. Hiring talented teachers for HISD is going to become increasingly difficult. Board members, please open your eyes and start thinking critically about what the real consequences are of allowing Mike Miles free rein. When your children's schools become part of NES, or property values start decreasing and it hits your wallets and finances, it will be too late. I'm going to keep coming to these meetings and invite more parents and concerned citizens to join HoustonCVPE.org.
Our next speaker is Christina Acosta, followed by Ruth Kravitz and Selena Manzano. Ms. Acosta, is she here? Yes, ma'am. We have a
Okay, let me read my son's speech because he's been working on it. Come here. It says, hi, my name is Alex Acosta. I'm here to speak to the superintendent and the board of managers and this trauma that Mike Miles has caused to these schools. Like, you have to carry a cone just to go to the bathroom. Like what? If the kids have a medical condition or they have to go really bad, like they have the right to leave the classroom when they need to use the restroom. Plus, the library is now a detention room. Now kids are upset because now they can't read their favorite book. And there are teachers who left because of you, Mike Miles, and tried to walk a mile in these kids' shoes, the NES and the NESA shoes, and the teachers, they have to go through this trauma you have caused. Thank you, and remember my name, Alex Acosta and Christina Acosta. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ruth Kravitz, followed by Selena Manzano. Ms. Kravitz, please go ahead.
Thank you so much. I've taught in several schools in Houston ISD, in the Gambia, in Bolivia, and in Panama. I've taught rich kids. I've taught poor kids. I've taught kids who are intrinsically motivated and kids who are not. What all of the students have in common is that they learned best when they felt seen, trusted, and valued. When the classroom was a community, a welcoming place, and a place filled at least sometimes with happiness, smiles, and joy. That's why I'm here today. So I asked a former student a couple hours ago who hated math when I taught him why he tried so hard in my class. And I wish I was more like Miss Jane, the pre-K teacher. Thank you for coming tonight. We are also lucky to have had you teaching for 27 years. So I'm a poor substitute for her. And he said to me, I was a storyteller, I connected math to their lives, I talked about world events and real-life applications. He told me he trusted me and believed that I had his best interests at heart. He said I helped him to decide to believe in himself. He said I created a safe space for kids to learn, that I made class fun, understandable, and interesting, that he never felt dumb for not knowing everything. He said, you used to say all the time, you're not all going to become engineers or mathematicians, and that's not why you're here in this class. But all of you will apply the problem-solving and critical thinking skills that we learn in this class to your life and your future. He went to college, graduated, and now owns a bookstore. He mentors kids. He supports his community. He is a beacon on the hill. That's real educational reform. That's why I'm here. Kids cannot learn if there's no joy. Teachers won't do their best work in a culture of fear. So I want to thank all of the teachers who have created welcoming places, who built trust and real relationships with their students as a powerful glue that helps students succeed, even when they get write-ups, even when they get...
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am. I'd like to acknowledge Ms. Mendoza has joined us. Thank you. Our last speaker here with us is Selena Manzano. Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead. And have a translator? Okay.
Buenas
All right, thank you.
noches. Al venir hacia acá venía con muchas dudas de saber qué iba a decir porque siento que muchas veces no nos escuchan.
Good evening. As I came over here tonight, I have a lot of questions as to what I wanted to bring up because I feel like you guys are not listening to us.
Pero hace 2 semanas mis hijos se enfermaron de flu
2 weeks ago, my children got sick with the flu,
y faltaron toda una semana a la escuela.
and they missed out a whole week of school.
Traté de mandar muchos mensajes por ClassDojo a sus maestros y nunca tuve una respuesta.
I tried to send messages through the teachers and never once got a reply.
Hasta el día jueves que me contestó la maestra de mi niño menor y le dije, ¿puede llamarme por favor?
Up until Thursday, when the teacher of my younger child contacted me, and ¿usted dijo que se la llamara usted o ella le dijo?
Ella que me llamara a mí.
So I asked if she could call me.
Pude tener comunicación con la maestra, le comenté la situación de mi niño y pude darme cuenta de lo equivocada que yo estaba.
I talked to her, I explained to her the situation of my child, and it's there when I realized how mistaken I was.
Viene y me dice, señora Manzano, siento mucho lo que está pasando, pero tiene que entender que nosotros no podemos hablar con los padres.
She stated, Ms. Manzano, I'm very sorry for what you're going through, but we are not allowed to talk to the parents.
Y le digo, pero ¿por qué si quiero darle razón de mi niño? El nuevo sistema nos está diciendo que hay cosas que podemos hablar y que no. Y le dije, yo quiero hablar de la salud de mi hijo, no de otra cosa.
So she explained to me that the new system doesn't allow for communication with us, and unless it's certain topics, and say, how come? I want to talk to you about my child's health.
Esto no lo teníamos antes y se lo puedo decir con mucha razón porque tengo un niño autista, el otro asmático y tenía una comunicación perfecta con los maestros desde el día 1.
This never happened before. I have a child with asthma and a child with autism, and we always have a straight and clear communication with our teachers from day one.
Teníamos maestros con vocación, como lo es mi Jane, que es otra persona que está aquí y fue destituida nada más por cuidar a un familiar, que eso, se lo digo de verdad, se me hace injusto.
We used to have teachers with talent and passion, and such as Miss James, who has been let go, people that has passion, and this is simply not fair.
El estado de salud de nuestros hijos, de nuestros familiares, no se puede controlar, pero ustedes sí pueden controlar desde ahí el decidir si vas a seguir o no vas a seguir. Y se me hace injusto nuevamente que corran a personas con vocación y ustedes ahí sentaditos, como si nada, sin planear las cosas que ellos planean.
We can't foresee the health of our family members, of our teachers. It's very, very unfair that you're just all sitting there also nicely, sitting quietly, and well, you know, we're just losing our positions. This is very, very unfair.
Los maestros están tristes, los maestros están preocupados, están muchas veces decepcionados. Por favor,
Can you, let's just hear can we turn it on so we can hear? Oh. Can you just talk loudly?
All right.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. The teachers are sad. This is very frustrating and very disheartening. Please put your hands on your heart and try to think about the future of these children. They are what they can push the children forward. Please think about the teachers.
Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
I want teachers happy and not sad.
Okay, thank you. Okay. We have one speaker on this topic who wishes to address the board via Zoom. Ms. Smith, can you admit Audrey Nath?
Audrey Nath, please turn your camera on. You may begin.
Hello. Sorry about that. My name is Audrey Nath. I am a HISD parent of 2 children and a physician, and I am concerned about reports that teachers are being written up for allowing their students to use the restroom during instructional time. So especially that there have been reports of girls who are menstruating and bleeding through their garments. This is really concerning because with very limited time between classes, there's going to be kids that are not using the restroom and will develop UTIs, kidney infections, potentially toxic shock syndrome in our menstruating girls. And we don't want to go and become a society where girls don't feel comfortable going to school during their periods and affecting their education. So as a physician and a mother, I think we really need to rethink writing up teachers for allowing their kids to go to the restroom. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. That concludes our hearing of agenda speakers. The purpose of our workshop this evening is Lone Star Governance Progress Monitoring Training. The purpose of this workshop is to receive training on Lone Star Governance Progress Monitoring in accordance with the Texas Education Agency Lone Star Governance Continuous Improvement Model and the Framework for School Board Development. The model and the framework ensure that Texas school boards each create a shared vision that promotes improved student outcomes. This is done in collaboration with the superintendent as a governance leadership team and incorporates the vision and goals of the school community. The team develops student outcome goals as we have, as well as student, superintendent, and board constraints to monitor progress and accountability for achieving those goals. I would like to invite board coach Ashley Paz of Collective Leadership Strategies to the podium now to lead our training on progress monitoring. Is this mic now on? I think they have to set something up here. Can you? Okay. It's on. Is it on?
Is it on now?
Oh,
great. Good. Hi, everybody. Before we get started, I want to, so this is a really important training for the board, as you are all aware. And because of the importance of this training, I want to make sure that our community members do have the ability to follow along. And so all of the materials for tonight's meeting, all of the coaching documents and pre-reading that you've been shared is available on the website. But it's on the special board meetings page, not the regular board meetings, because this is a special training for the board. So I want to make sure that the community does have that ability if they wish to follow along.
Just so I'm clear. So is it? Yeah. It's on the board page.
It's on the board meeting page under the special meetings.
Okay. Thank you. Please go ahead.
Okay. So let's talk about progress monitoring. So in a previous training, we discussed how there is an emerging body of research that the Lone Star Governance Framework is predicated on. This research tells us that that school board behaviors matter. Some of the behaviors of school boards matter more than others, especially on the effect of improving student outcomes. While relatively new, this research reveals that even though distant from the classroom, there are board behaviors which allow school board members to positively influence improving student outcomes. I want to make sure that we're here. So all of these behaviors are listed on this slide. And if you have so they're not on the board, but in the Lone Star Governance Manual, our integrity instrument, the rubric that is laid out for school board effectiveness, this actually aligns with all of the categories of that manual. On the slide, it lists those behaviors. Now, of all of these behaviors, there are 3 specific that are the most correlated with things that school boards can do to improve student outcomes. These are that they take the vision of the community and they use that vision to adopt student outcome goals. Next, you take the values of the community and you use those values to formulate and adopt non-negotiables to protect those values. We call these constraints. Y'all done that. You just finished doing that. And now that has been done, it's time to move on to the next step. And the longest term and most constant behavior of school boards, of effective school boards that lead in districts where student outcomes are improving, is that they, after adopting these priorities, they then monitor the progress toward whether or not they're being achieved. So let's talk about why school boards would do this. Y'all were given some pre-reading before tonight. In that pre-reading, one of the pages or one of the documents is titled Effective Goal Monitoring. This document is going to guide our conversation for tonight. And it's in your packets in front of you as well. So I want to ask you to think back to the pre-reading that you had. And I want to go ahead and just throw the first question out to the board. What can you tell me about progress monitoring? What are the things just that you remember about progress monitoring that you read in that? Who'll be the first to share? What do you remember about progress monitoring? What do you know?
It should be set up to monitor for the span of the entirety of the goal period.
Yeah, you're going to be monitoring the progress of your goals for the entire time of the of your goals. So the goals last for 5 years, so you're going to be monitoring for those entire 5 years, and you have a calendar that tells you how to do that. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll add to it. I'll say that it's perhaps one of the most important things a board can do. In addition to all the other stuff, but this is our primary focus, progress monitoring.
Yeah, progress monitoring is one of the most important things that the board does, because it is the thing that you are going to do for the longest, for the full length of your goals. Yeah. What else? What else can you tell me about progress monitoring? Michelle.
Communication is key, intentions, expectations.
Yeah, communication is key. Intentions, setting expectations. Progress monitoring is an opportunity to have those communications. Yeah, so in that first section of the document, it's titled "How is Monitoring Beneficial?" And this is what it's really speaking to. Progress monitoring is an opportunity for the board to lead by example. And so what I mean by this is something you all have heard me say a few times now, is that what happens in the boardroom will be seen in the classroom. The way that the school board engages with data, the way that the school board engages in accountability conversations, the way that the school board is setting those expectations and having those conversations and communicating around the achievement of their goals can reasonably be expected to also be seen in the classroom with the way that teachers engage with students. So if a school board is leaning into data around student improvement, and you're treating it with compassion, and you're setting high expectations, but also looking at it with a continuous improvement lens, then you can expect for that to be the way that that your teachers are also engaging with their students, and that the principals are engaging with the teachers, and your executive directors are engaging with the principals. We call this cascading, this act of the behaviors here also happening there. We also,
Excuse me, Ashley. Just for clarity, which document are you using right now? Because I don't think we are all.
The effective goal monitoring. All right. So the next section, or the next piece, the next reason that we do progress monitoring is to clarify strategies. When the board receives monitoring reports from the superintendent, the report should really be written at a 6th grade level. It should be concise, and it should be clear, not just for the board, but for the community that you serve. And that the strategies that the superintendent is using will be reflected in the report so that not just the board knows what's going on, but the entire community knows what's going on as well. And that progress can be that as we look at these monitoring reports and we are watching these monitoring conversations, it can be clear to everyone who's paying attention what strategies are being employed, how successful those strategies are being implemented, and how the emerging data that is coming from the reports is being used to inform the superintendent's strategies moving forward. The next piece is around communicating expectations. So when the board is spending at least 50% of its time in board authorized public meetings, that is all of your board meetings, your committee meetings, anytime that you are in the public, engaging with the public, we call those board authorized public meetings. When you spend at least 50% of your time in those conversations about improving student outcomes, the board is making clear what priorities are the most important. You are telling the community what your values are. You're saying this is how we are spending the majority of our time because this is the thing that is the most important for our district. And then finally, progress monitoring is where accountability lives. These are all accountability. Every single time you have a progress monitoring session, it is an accountability conversation with the superintendent. That doesn't mean, now I want to make sure everybody's clear, accountability doesn't mean we're going to whack the superintendent over the head with the data when we don't like it. That's not accountability. That's weaponizing data, and that's not what the recommendation is here. Accountability is coming together with a regular cadence of discussion and dialogue, so that the expectation is that we're going to have these conversations, and that we're going to talk about how improvement is happening, and that it can be seen by anyone who cares to watch. So this is it. This is why we do monitoring: to lead by example, to clarify strategies, to communicate expectations, and to have this ongoing, upfront, in public, regular accountability with the superintendent. So I want you to, again, want to ask you to think back to your pre-reading. So we've, in this monitoring document, it talks about why we monitor, but it also talks about the different steps of monitoring. So we have before monitoring, during monitoring, and after monitoring. What can you tell me, who can remember what the document says about the things that need to happen before monitoring?
The things we've done already, like setting SMART goals and developing a calendar and all the stuff you kind of referenced.
Yeah, so we definitely need to set our goals, set our constraints before we start monitoring. We also have to have a calendar. Why do we need to have a calendar? Why is it important to have a calendar?
There's a cadence that's needed so that the administration can be prepared, and they can also have the community, prepared to understand what's being presented, and so also that we can have a clear expectation about what topics we're going to be discussing and moving forward.
Yeah, so this is how we're setting a clear expectation about when we're going to be having these discussions. It's not just that we're setting a cadence of when things are happening, which is absolutely part of having a good monitoring calendar, but it's also about being clear with the community, being clear with your staff, being clear with everyone involved that this is when we are going to be monitoring these things. So if we're going to be talking about third grade reading, that's going to happen this month, and this month. If we're going to be talking about math, then that's going to happen this month, and this month. So there is no surprise. Everyone should know exactly when these things are going to happen. Thank you, Adam. What else can you tell me about what happens? What are the other things that need to happen before monitoring?
I just wanted to add about the monitoring so that you can use the interim reports and data to make changes in the moment to increase progress for kids so that we don't just set a plan and go through it and find out at the end of the year whether or not it worked.
Yeah, this is when, this is how we know that when we're going to be looking at the progress we've made on different things and if adjustments need to be made to the strategies. You don't want to set a goal and then not know whether or not you're going to achieve the goal until it's time for it to be achieved. You want to know whether or not you're likely to achieve that goal before the end. So it's really important to be doing this monitoring, and the calendar is going to tell you exactly when that happens. Your monitoring report is what is where all of that information is actually going to be laid out. Yeah. For the most effective progress monitoring, the things that need to happen beforehand, the board needs to adopt a monitoring calendar. You need to have a monitoring report that is clear and contains, and we have some recommendations that we'll talk about in a little bit of what that report should look like. There needs to be an effective superintendent participation and an effective board member participation. Before we move on, what questions or comments do you have about progress monitoring so far? About what happens before monitoring, why we monitor, and so on and so forth.
I just have one thing. We haven't talked about it, but I think it's really important because the work that's done to know kind of where our students are, that hasn't been mentioned yet, but that's key, I think, to the development of both the goals and constraints, which is part of this, but also the monitoring calendar.
Yeah. Yeah, understanding all of the work that's been done so far that has gotten us to where our kids are right now. Great. So these are the resources that we need. We just kind of briefly went through these. We're going to dig in a little bit deeper in just a moment about each of these different things, what they mean. What is an effective monitoring calendar? What is an effective monitoring report? What does effective superintendent participation look like? And what does effective board member participation look like? So first, let's talk about the monitoring calendar. These are the attributes of an effective monitoring calendar. The board's monitoring calendar is going to communicate when the board will monitor which priorities in a public discussion. It's going to last 3 to 5 years. It's going to monitor all of the board's adopted goals and constraints. The goals you want to monitor at least 4 times a year. The constraints should be monitored at least once. It'll include, and I said at least once, that doesn't mean you can only monitor them once, but they have to be monitored at least once. It's going to include some additional things as well. So trainings, evaluation. So when is the superintendent going to be evaluated? When is the board going to conduct their self-evaluations? When are you going to be doing additional training? So your Lone Star governance training and all of your state required training. And then legal requirements. You have a lot of things that you're legally required to do throughout the year. One of those things is actually coming up soon. You have your first training, which is a financial training. You have budget hearings and tax ratification hearings and so on and so forth. And so it'll lay out all of those things. And then also you're really only going to be looking at 1 or 2 goal progress measures per month. You don't want to ever schedule more than 3, but always at least 1 or 2, because you want to make sure that you are creating enough space to have really comprehensive conversations. And if you try to cram a whole bunch of that into one meeting, it really just can't happen effectively. Goal monitoring should never be received via the consent calendar. You should always be having those discussions live and in public. However, you can receive constraint monitoring reports on the consent agenda. Constraints are focused on adult outcomes or operational matters, and so it is permissible, but this board doesn't have a whole lot of constraints, so I imagine that you probably are going to want to be having those conversations live and in public. And then finally, the most important thing is that every single month of the year that the board meets, you're going to want to be monitoring your student outcome goals. So those are the high-level attributes to look at for your monitoring calendar. But you may be asking, what does our monitoring calendar look like? This is great, like theoretical stuff, but what does it look like for us? And so for that conversation, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Miles and let him present the proposed progress monitoring calendar.
All right, thank you, Ashley. The screen, I hope you'll have it on your monitors. This is what we're proposing, and you will see just on broad view, one of the things we tried to do, of course, is to do what's on the first page of the effective goal monitoring, meaning, monitoring each goal at least 4 times throughout the year, making sure each guardrail is at least 1 time per year, 2 interim goals, no more than that in a month, and so forth. So you notice that we color-coded just to keep the goals easy. The goals are on the left column there. So 1.1, you see, and 1.2, 1.3, those are all goal 1. And then goal 1 reading at the end there, so that would be 4 times in the year. So forth and so on. That's what the color coding is about. And also, you notice that in the goals, each goal, if you look where the data source is, that's what the data will be providing. And then the description is over there on the right. We stuck strictly to the goals because those are the board goals and constraints, and the constraint measures as well. So I don't need to read this directly. I'll just start you off on it. We have NWA MAP assessments. In January, we will do a review and a more detailed view of the NWA scores from the first semester, and then you know that we will take the NWA again at the end of January. That's why you see March middle of the year scores at that time. We also have the CCMR coming up in February, so we'll provide a lot of data around that, which is goal 3. Goal 2 is our math NWA. So that's how you read this, and you can see that we hit all of the goals and the progress monitoring measures. Special education is also a pretty big one. As you can see, goal number 4. And the first time we do that in April, but we will do a couple of things in May, where we have a lot more data for the middle of the year, and then again in September. So again, one of the reasons why you see it spread out like that is because we're trying to do 4 times a year, but not pilot all the reading at one time, so that that's a real progress monitoring metric. You also see our constraints progress measures in April and in June and in August, so we hit all of them. And in September, it's at least once in a year. And actually, two times for most of them. So do we need to go any further into this, Ashley, or?
So I think one of the things to point out is that this is January through, I think, October for the first year, so your first year of monitoring. And then years 2 through 5 will begin to repeat the cycle. And I think they look maybe a little bit different. So so because this is the first year and it's not a full calendar year, not everyone is going to be on that 4 times per year because you're literally starting in the middle of the year.
Yeah, and I just put up the next 4 years.
Yeah, and
just to give the board a preview.
Yeah, and so here you can see where that monitoring 4 times per year really starts to take place.
I have a question. So when do we include all the trainings and the board evaluations, superintendent, like when do we make?
Yeah, so that is on the final version that is going, it should be in your board agenda packets for the next, for this next board meeting. I don't know if you've got.
You're talking about the implementation schedule?
No, the monitoring calendar, yeah.
So the calendar next time around will be complete with all of the other things that you've told us we need to have in it?
I believe so. I've seen with my own eyes the final copy that has all of the things. But this is right now. This is the main thing, is that all of your goals and constraints are being monitored.
Yeah, just asking when it's going to be complete. Okay.
Yeah, it's complete, and it should be in your agenda packets.
Can I ask a ticky-tacky question? And it looks like in May, we've got special education 4.1 and 4.2 being monitored, but it says the data is available 5/25. Our meeting is before that. So I don't know if the dates are correct, and I just want to make sure those align to when we're actually going to have data.
I think they're looking into that.
We will have the data before the meeting, because that's the middle of the year data, so we will have it by that time.
Okay. What other questions do you all have about the monitoring calendar?
Are you saying that that the monitoring calendar, we have it with the additional dates that Angie was talking about? It's done? Or
I believe so. It definitely is completed.
Okay.
And it should be. Y'all are going to be voting on it next week.
Do we need to look at that here tonight or no?
This is the most important. So this is the most important thing for y'all to look at tonight. I don't know if superintendent has it.
Yeah, I don't have the evaluation thing. This is focused on the goals and constraints and progress monitoring metrics.
All right. If there are no other questions, then we'll move on. I'm just going to wait there we go. Okay, so we've looked at the monitoring calendar. Next, we want to talk about what makes up a quality monitoring report. And so, again, in your in the folders that you have been provided, there is a sample progress monitoring report. It looks like this. And so I just want to note for everyone that this is a sample report. This is not Houston ISD data. These are not Houston ISD strategies. These are, it is a real report from another district, but all of the information has been masked, and because we want to make it safe, we don't want to put anybody out there. And so this document has all of the attributes that we encourage districts to include on their monitoring reports. And so what does that actually mean? And also understand this is a baseline. So this is like this report meets like the threshold that you should expect. It doesn't mean this is what your report isn't necessarily going to look like this. Your data isn't going to look like this. The layout will be different. But we wanted to give you something to be able to look at and kind of deliberate together in a practice conversation tonight. Okay, so the first thing that we want to look at in an effective monitoring report, we want to make sure that it clearly shows what is actually being monitored. So does it show the goal? And if you're looking at goal progress measures, does it also show the goal progress measures? So is that present on this document?
Yes.
Yeah, it's at the very top. And it's literally just, is the language written on the report? The next piece, does it clearly show the data for the 3 previous reporting periods, the current results, so the current reporting period, and then those annual targets that have been forecasted by the superintendent and staff, and the deadline target, so the final result that you're looking for at the end of the goal cycle. So is that present on the document? Yeah, you've got it right. The big, nice big chart right there in the very front. And the key is that it's clear. So when I say clear, that means that you know exactly what you're looking at. The source is listed. It's labeled. You know what information. You know that this information is past. This is current. This is future. So it's clear, and the clarity is really important. Board members have a lot of information just by your proximity to the district that the general community is not going to have. And so as a board member, you can probably look at it and guess like, oh, this is what it says. We don't want you to guess because your reports really have to be calibrated for the community. You want it to be clear for anyone who's looking at it to know exactly what they're looking at. So the next piece is, does it clearly show the superintendent's evaluation of the results? So we know that the results are present, but does the superintendent provide a response that says, this is what the results say? So here, I think the copy that you have is a little bit different than the copy that I have, but it's really big. It says that this is off track. So there's no guesswork involved. We know exactly what the process is. But also, going a little bit further, does the report clearly describe the superintendent's understanding of why it's off track? And that's the superintendent's evaluation. So we know how he or she interprets the data, but we also want to know how the superintendent evaluates the data. They know what it says, but do they know what the reason is? What are the root causes that are driving the results that we're seeing? And that is the single most important part of the monitoring report. And that's what at the end of your monitoring conversation, that's the thing that you, as a board, want to make sure that you are walking away with an understanding of. Does the superintendent understand what is driving the results, whether those are happy results or sad results? We definitely want the information to be on track, but the most important thing is that the superintendent knows why those results are happening, and that that knowledge is informing the strategies that are moving forward. So whether we're going to stay the course or whether we're going to pivot, we want to ensure that the superintendent knows and that that information is informing the decisions to move forward.
Ashley,
Yes.
so I understand that it's our job to come prepared and ask the questions to get to that. But
Yes.
should our expectation be that the superintendent comes to the meeting already, should we understand he's already analyzed it and made a plan prior to?
Oh, yes, and that's why, so, for example, and that's a great question. So, for example, you may receive, so looking at your SPED goal, I think that that one, I think that data was available in January. I think that maybe was when it was captured. But you're not actually going to be having that monitoring conversation for generally like 30, somewhere between 30 and 90 days later. Sometimes a little bit longer, just depending on when different things can be monitored. Sometimes they have to kind of lump a lot of things together. So we want to make sure that that's spread out. But you're not going to be looking at the data right after it's received, because you want to make sure that your superintendent and administration have the time to review that data, to interpret it, and not just that that they understand and that they're going to make decisions and that it's going to influence their strategies, but really the ideal scenario is that the superintendent is able to come in and say, this is how we have included this information in our strategies moving forward. Maybe it's not a fully formulated, like, here are the things that we've done and now we're seeing these results, but we saw this happen and now we know that this is a place that we're going to have to pivot. So we've made this pivot and now that's how we're going to move forward. Michelle.
Given that we were not here for previous years, so this may be a question for the superintendent, how do we handle lag data? I know I have full faith in the district in interpreting data, but how do we get concrete on the why for the lag data?
Yeah, I mean, so we've done a needs assessment even before we started this process and the goals and constraints. So we can look at some of the past data. For example, you're talking about there wasn't any NWEA, and so we're going to have to look at our baseline NWEA. We're going to have to look at some baseline DIBELS and other data, and then try to make a determination on things like the CCMR, the CTE points. That is a year lag. We will use the data from the current year, and we will bring up in the graph the last 2 years, so you can see what is really lagging. But we'll have present year data too, the best that we can. So we already have those metrics, and they're part of the progress monitoring metrics also.
For CTE, I know there's a big lag, and we discussed that before. But I assume that there's some things that we track locally that we can continue to use as a guide.
That's right, and that's what I was saying when we had our progress monitoring conversation about possible progress monitoring goals or metrics. That came up, and we will have some. It won't be apples to apples really, but we will have some data on where we are with regard to, for example, passage of ACT or SAT by that point. We will have some data on college and career readiness. People have already done dual credit. So we will have some pieces of it. We won't have the full goal data yet.
Yeah, and so keeping on the subject of data, so we've looked at the first page, but I want to also point out on the second page, so it has a superintendent's evaluation of performance relative to the goal. So telling you, like, this is where we want to be, this is where we are. But it's not just as for that overall, like the aggregate
goal. You also, remember, you have your student group information. So you have all of those student group targets that you've identified. Now, these student groups are going to look a little bit different than the student groups that you all have, just because this district isn't actually a Texas district. So their state requires a little bit of a differentiation in the way that they report student groups than Texas does. But you still get the drift. And so they've identified, here are the student groups. This is where, and this is the overall counts for those students in this population. The percentage of those students meeting the goal, and then the percentage of the goal achieved. So the percentage of those students who, this is the percentage of the the first column is from that overall goal. This is how it's broken out by, so if we achieved 27.9% on the goal, this is the makeup of that goal. And then the next is, these are, so these students achieved the goal to this degree. So for example, American Indian or Alaskan Native, so that's less than 10, which is below the federal reporting. The next would be Asian, so they had 107.6% of the goal that was achieved. So if the goal was 37, they actually achieved higher than 37%. And so that's just the way that this state wants them to report it. Your reporting would look different, and your data team has that all really clear. So when you're looking at the student groups, this is your opportunity to really lean into those conversations about closing the gaps. And it's where you are able to really lean into those student group targets that you set, and having conversations about how equity lives in the strategies. And remember, you were very clear, like some of your student groups, you do expect bigger growth because you do have gaps that need to be made up. Any questions about that before I go on to the next section of the report? Okay. So in the next section,
I think I do have a question.
Yeah.
Do we drill down to the strategy level on those equity issues? Are those fair game questions, or is that considered too operational?
It depends. So you definitely want to know why different groups are performing at different levels. So questions like, I see that our African American students, socioeconomically disadvantaged students, and students receiving special education services have, an over 20-point gap in this area right now. And so, what is your understanding of what is driving that those results? What is causing that gap to persist? That would definitely be a fair game question, like seeking to understand why there is a disparity in the data. Also,
the question I want to ask is, what are you going to do about it? Is that not fair game?
So that is fair game at a point. So we're going to talk about the types of questions that board members ask in about 20 minutes. But to get just a preview, so yes, that is fair game, but first the board should understand what the current data says, what's driving the current results, and then after that understanding has been gained, then you can start having conversations about the future, conversations that talk about what we're going to do about it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So we know what the data says. We know that the superintendent has an understanding of the data. Now, what's going to happen? How is that understanding actually influencing his decisions, influencing his strategies?
And so that is laid out in this report through the next steps. And this superintendent has identified 2 theories of action, or two specific strategies that they want to invest in to get this to get back on track with this goal. And so one of those is if we improve attendance, there will be increases in student learning reflected in both improved growth as well as achievement. And then they clearly tie this is the relationship between attendance and goal performance. And so they've given a nice little narrative there that lays that out. And then on the next page, they've actually listed some action steps. So what is this actually going to look like? They're going to launch a district-wide campaign targeted at the importance of school attendance with specialized messaging for pre-K through grade 2 students. They're going to launch an everyday labs district-wide. This is a strategy that district has put together to reach out to and provide support for families of kindergarten through 1st grade chronically absent students. And that was because they had identified that was like a target area that they needed to focus on. And then they're going to continue to build the capacity of elementary principals to focus on family engagement and school climate. So attendance is going to be one of their strategies. The next strategy that they've identified is if students participate in iReady supplemental instructional activities for at least 30 to 49 minutes per week with a minimum success rate of 70%, that's the lesson passing, then the growth will be accelerated and achievement will increase. So this is one that the reason I like to list this one is because this can be kind of a controversial strategy. And so it's not the purpose of progress monitoring isn't to agree with the superintendent's strategies. The superintendent's strategies are the strategies that they're employing. The purpose of monitoring is to understand what those strategies are and how they are going to get you back on track. And that those strategies are sufficient to make that happen. So if this strategy equals 2 and this strategy equals 2 and you're trying to get to 4, then 2 plus 2 equals 4. But if the math isn't mathing, then the board has a responsibility to have a conversation to understand why. We could also say the same thing about the attendance strategy, but we're not criticizing strategies today, we're just looking at the report. So this superintendent has identified 2 strategies to get them back on track. And so they went through, had the conversation, and said, you know what, we're good with these, we're going to accept the report. They vote to accept the report and they move on. When they vote to accept the report, they are not approving the strategies, they are not approving of the data that they're looking at. They're not saying we like this or we don't like this. Because there certainly will be times when you're looking at data that is disappointing. The purpose of monitoring isn't to be happy with the information that you're looking at. It's to have that continuous improvement conversation about how we're going to move forward.
I'm sorry, can I ask a question? Say again, so you're saying we are to approve the monitoring report? But it is not our job to approve either the strategies or the data. Like, we're not saying this is good.
Yeah.
What is the precise thing that we're doing with regard to the strategies? Are we just hearing it and saying, sounds aligned? Or are we saying, what are we saying about it?
Yeah, so you're not voting to approve the report, you're voting to accept the report.
Okay.
So the vote signifies that the conversation has happened and that the superintendent has done a good job or has done a satisfactory job at explaining what their understanding of what the data is, what their understanding of the root cause that's driving that data, and then how that understanding is influencing their decisions to move forward, and that there is a plan that will sufficiently get you back on track.
Sorry to ask a follow-up, but so then is the question that we're asking relative to the strategy what is it? Do I think this is aligned, or do I think that this is okay? Or are there words on a page? I mean, it sounds like there's gotta be.
There are words on a page.
Okay.
There are words on a page, but I do want to explain. I want to make sure that there's a good understanding, and we'll go into a little bit more detail when we get to like the end of after monitoring conversation.
Okay.
So the thing that you have to understand as it relates to the strategies is that the superintendent understands what is driving the current results, so that there is an understanding of the root cause, and that understanding is influencing the strategies moving forward. So I know what's going on, and my knowledge of what's going on is impacting my decision making, and that there is a plan to get us back from. So if we want to be at 4, but we're only at 2, how we're going to get there.
If there's a misalignment in that regard, what happens if a majority of the board doesn't approve the report?
Yeah, so accept the report,
Or
not
accept the
approve it. So you say, superintendent, come back. We're going to table this discussion and come back next month with a better formulated plan. Or in some circumstances, the board will want to say, you know what, this is just completely insufficient, and the superintendent doesn't know what's going on, and that there is no knowledge of what is driving these results, and we're going to vote to not accept this report. Now, I want to be clear, when the board chooses to vote to not accept a report, that is going to be perceived as a vote of no confidence, and that should be used sparingly. And it is not a recommendation to happen for a long while after you've been monitoring. You want to make sure that the superintendent has time to actually implement a plan and understand relative to what's happening. And so I just want to be clear that is not a recommendation that the board just be going and saying, oh, we're just going to have all of these no confidence votes.
I have a question. Can you tell us what it looks like, what insufficient looks like?
Yeah. So let's look at this report. So some people might ask, looking at the strategies that relates to attendance. So remember, you have to take a couple of things into account here. First of all, this is a goal progress measure that is looking at first grade performance. So, on paper, like at an initial glance, you might say, no, this is fine. Like, that's attendance, yeah, sure. But then when you start to lean in and think about it for a minute, you're like, wait a minute. If we spend all of these resources focusing on improving attendance, is that actually going to get us where we want to be? Especially for first grade attendance. Superintendent, why don't first graders come to school?
So there's all kinds of reasons, and I think the main thing is to what degree do you have control over that, and then 2, how much time and effort it takes to really make a difference on that. You improve your attendance by 5 percentage points. How much effort is there going to be? Maybe the money and time would be better spent improving reading instruction for the kids who do show up. So, I know we're not supposed to critique the strategy.
No, you can critique it now.
But,
we're getting to that point.
But this is not a good strategy, and even the second one is not good either. The intervention one, any really effective superintendent knows that first good instruction is always where the bang for the buck is. First good instruction. If you don't have first good instruction, then you push your kids to interventions where it's less effective, less expert teachers are doing it, less time. So how about putting your money and effort and time into a strategy that improves reading instruction for the first graders rather than these 2 other things?
Yeah. So I have given this training a number of times to a number of boards, and I always ask this question of the superintendent, like, why don't first graders come to school? Almost always the answer is, well, they're sick, or they start going into the actual things that mean the reasons that first graders aren't there, or they talk about, well, we can work on like making school buses run on time. No, where your superintendent just went is where you're supposed to go. And the fact that he went straight there is telling. If the superintendent doesn't have the ability to control at least 80% of the strategy that's being recommended, then that should be a red flag. You want to make sure that if you're going to pour all of these resources into the strategy, that it's something that's actually going to be achievable, and that is going to help you move.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Don't they have to be a student outcome focus?
The strategies?
Yeah, that we're monitoring?
The goals that you're monitoring, yes, but the strategies are going to be inputs. So the strategies are going to be things that, some of them, I definitely.
Could be things that adults are going to do.
Yeah, they're going to be things that adults are going to be going to do. So, and the closer that it is to the actual classroom and the students, the stronger correlation it's going to have to actually improving student outcomes. So think about it like playing basketball. And I think we've already established that I'm not good at sports analogies, so just bear with me here. So if I want to get good at winning basketball games, I can sit here and I can learn how to dribble really well, or I can learn how to pass with my teammates, or I can do all of conditioning exercises, all of the things that are going to hopefully one day make me a really good basketball player. I'm 5'3", so I'm probably barking up the wrong tree with that. But none of those things are actually going to help me win games. The only thing that's going to help me win games is learning how to win games. So actually scoring those goals. How am I making goals? So even like shooting, like learning how to shoot three-pointers, free throws. I told y'all. Even that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to get really good at winning the game. The only thing that's going to really make me good at winning the game is learning how to score and really focusing on practicing scoring. And so the closer my strategies to get good at winning the game are to learning how to score, the better it's going to be. If I tell you I'm going to go out and shop for a new basketball wardrobe, or if I'm going to go and spend a lot of money on marketing for my team, it's probably not going to get me on track. So I don't know if that's helpful.
You're saying closest to the child.
Closest to the child.
Okay.
Actually, I have an observation about the superintendent evaluation for this example.
Yeah.
Based on the characteristics of a quality monitoring report, I don't see a root cause here in this example we're given. I don't know if I'm missing it, or is that accurate? I don't see why students are achieving below the target.
That's because there's not one.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's really the takeaway is that the superintendent didn't actually understand what the root cause was for this. So they focused on two things that they're already investing in and that are popular. I mean, this was a report from, I think it was from 2021, where iReady was like the whole thing. And so that was, think of what was happening in at the end of year or middle of the year in 2021 or 21-22. So you've got kids coming back to school from COVID, and you've got all of that money that had been poured into all of these computer programs like iReady and iStation, and so those were the things that everybody was pushing. And so those were two of like the easiest things for them to put on here. But there really was a fundamental misunderstanding of what was driving the root cause for this.
So Ashley, what are we to do in that situation then? So if it's an unacceptable analysis and an unacceptable report, then we say, we're going to send it back?
Yeah, so you can table it, or you can, I mean, you're probably going to table it.
We wouldn't vote not to accept it?
You could vote not to accept it if that
Okay.
was, if that's where you were with your superintendent. But ideally,
okay.
you want to keep the conversation going. You want to keep, and preferably, when you are doing your homework before the meeting, and you realize that there's not a root cause and that it's not clear, you go to the superintendent before the meeting and say, "Hey, superintendent, this root cause is a little murky. Can you work on that a little bit more before the meeting?" That's why we talk about having 14 days of notice and looking at it and asking all of those questions in advance. It's not just to help the board prepare, and it's not just for, it absolutely is for transparency, but it's also for helping the district prepare.
Go ahead.
My other question is, I think I understand you to say tabling it is more neutral and rejecting it is a signal of no confidence in the superintendent. So there are 2 degrees.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we're saying that clear because that's pretty important for us to not
Absolutely,
see these as.
absolutely important.
Okay, thanks.
So, I mean, that's interesting because the perspective on no confidence is a perspective. I feel like it's an opinion.
Yeah.
Because if we have the report 14 days in advance, we have signaled that it's not sufficient, and it still comes to us insufficient. I guess I need to understand what is, besides the signal, the perceived signal, what does tabling it do versus not accepting it?
It gives them more time to really, and that is probably the most appropriate response when there is, when the root cause hasn't been laid out as clearly. They may need to actually go back and spend some more time figuring that out. And tabling it gives them the ability to do that.
And why doesn't voting not to accept it give them time? Because surely we would want to see it again.
Oh, yeah, no, so voting no says, we're not accepting this report, this is insufficient, it's just a down vote. So no bringing it back after that. Tabling it allows them to come back.
Okay.
And so that's what allows the conversation to keep going.
Okay.
And so I want to let Mr. Miles speak, and then Jeanette, and then we're going to transition, and we're going to spend some more time talking about this, how we vote at the end.
Yeah,
Mr. Miles.
and just, disabuse me, Ashley, if I'm going down the wrong path. Boards want to be careful of dictating the strategy, overseeing the strategy, rejecting the strategy, because you hire a superintendent to do that. And in my opinion, if over time, now this one's pretty obvious, maybe. Maybe it's obvious. It obviously wasn't obvious to some board members somewhere, but I think board members should defer. And if over time you're not accepting, you should get a new superintendent.
Yep. And that's what happens when you vote no.
Yeah, instead of trying to run the district, trying to run the strategies. There is, in our case too, there's a lot of nuance. Root causes are several usually. For example, I can already tell you the root cause for many, many things right now, the reason why we have low achievement is because the quality of instruction is low. That's one root cause. There's several others. And so how do you improve the quality of instruction over time? You have the staff you have where you are, you put in place several different things. And I tell you what, by February, we will not be where we need to be on the quality of instruction. And that's just one piece. There'll be other analyses. But so to second guess and say, well, we don't agree that the quality of instruction is it, or you should have been able to improve it in 4 months, that's a pretty huge statement on whether or not you trust your superintendent to actually do the job. And again, if you don't trust the superintendent to do the job, you should get rid of that person.
Yeah.
Me or whoever.
And so, so yes, you're absolutely correct. And that's why we don't vote to approve the report. So you're absolutely not voting to approve the strategies. You're not selecting the strategies. You are simply accepting whether or not the conversation has happened. So I'll let you two figure this out.
What this discussion clarified for me is something that I hope that we help our community understand as well, which is that the actions that we take in the meeting are reflective of the two key items I think that you've shown here, the effective superintendent participation and board member participation. If we haven't done our homework, if we haven't done the discussions, if we haven't done that, then you see actions like what we've just described here. So with that in mind, the converse is we have done the work, we've done the preparation, we asked the questions, and therefore when we come to the meeting, we are, voting to approve, and that's that. Very low key, not very dramatic, but it's because we've done so much work ahead of time. So I wanted to clarify, that's my understanding of how I interpret this, and so I hope, that's helpful for those listening.
Excellent point.
Absolutely. Angie, and then we're going to transition.
I just want to backtrack because we're going to have these conversations about the change that we need for kids, but we also want everyone to feel supported in all of this change, and we're going to have to navigate having conversation about instruction and raising the quality in a way that our teachers know that we support them and that we're all in. So I want us to all think about how we do that, because I understand what we're talking about. We're working and we're talking strategy, but I also understand the feelings behind it, and I just want us to all be aware of that and be mindful and be respectful of each other as we try to navigate that so that our teachers get the right message.
Yeah, thank you for that. And hold on to that because we're going to come back to it in just a minute. All right. So let's briefly talk about the effective superintendent participation, which we kind of already have. So there are 5 things that the superintendent must do to ensure that their participation is effective. So first, as a superintendent is preparing these reports, do not hide the data. The data should be concise and it should be calibrated for the community. So I'm talking about hiding the data. Don't make it so complicated. Don't make this report should really be a maximum of 5 pages. It doesn't have to be as blown up as this one is. I just did that because it's easier to see. But you really should make sure that you should be ensuring that the community can interpret the report easily, and so that the data isn't hidden, that it really is accessible for the masses. Also, on that same note, don't sugarcoat the data. And knowing your superintendent, this is not something that y'all are going to have to worry about. Sugarcoating the reality for students will lose trust. So coming out and saying that, things are flowery and fine and that everything is good when in fact they aren't, it is going, and then at the end of the year, you get your test results back. Lo and behold, they are not what you were expecting. And everyone is surprised and everybody's pissed because they are surprised and they were not set up for that. If progress monitoring is effective, then you are going to be having real conversations about real information that is transparent and real, even when those conversations are difficult. Also, you should be aligning the monitoring with managerial action. So whatever information the cabinet is looking at, that's generally the thing that you should be talking about. You shouldn't be looking for, oh, well, what are we going to report this month? Report what you're looking at. Report what you're talking about. That's the easiest thing to do. Sometimes the most obvious thing is the right thing, but we overthink. So align monitoring with managerial action.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So does that mean that we don't dictate how the data comes back to us? Because if we're really using the reports that the leadership team uses, then it's not our job to play data person and ask for it a certain way. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. And that is a very important piece of clarification, because I cannot tell you how many times boards, and I did this as a board member too, guilty as charged, I want to see the data that I want to see. I want to see the data that I'm curious about. I want to see what scratches. I want to have this itch and I want it to be scratched. And the only way that can happen is with more data. The board shouldn't be looking at the data that they want to look at. They should be looking at the data that they need to look at. The next thing, be prepared. Most effective administrative teams are spending time before the monitoring sessions practicing, anticipating questions that may come from the board, and really having that candor-filled conversation that is like, tell me where I'm wrong. Tell me what's wrong with this. They should be looking for the blind spots because they know that if that's how they are orienting themselves before the monitoring sessions, then the monitoring session itself is going to be much more effective. The board is going to receive the information they need, and the community will be well informed. And then finally, don't be defensive. Anticipate that there are times when the data is going to be disappointing. These are opportunities to really lean into what you're going to do, to double down and say, look, this isn't great. I know that this isn't great. No one knows that better than me. Here are the ways that we're going to fix it. What questions do you have about superintendent participation? All right.
One question regarding data again. So I guess what I'm interested in knowing from here is, so we've got summative data in regards to like charts and darts. Are we also talking about supplemental data? Or are we, I'm just trying to understand is, if the administration just brought one chart, in this case on this particular piece, would that be considered sufficient? And then when we're talking about concise data, it's the words for me I'm having a hard time connecting the two. Yeah. Like, don't hide data, but then make it concise.
Yeah. So when I was in grad school, I had a strategy professor who said any idiot can write a 10-page paper about business strategy. It actually takes a brilliant person who understands business strategy to write it in a page and a half. And that's what you should expect from your superintendent, that it's not just drowning the board, drowning the community in information, because usually that is how data gets hidden. We're just going to overwhelm them with information so we don't actually have to talk about anything. You want it to be, and so when I say concise, I don't mean brief to the degree that you don't actually understand what's happening. Concise means it's whole, but not overly complicated.
At what specificity? I mean, this is saying the district. Like, are we doing NES, NESA? Are we doing by region? Like, he has so much to track.
Yeah, it depends on what
level does he communicate to us, and at one, what's our expectation?
Yeah, so you're a board that governs the district, not individual campuses, not individual sectors. Now, there may be times when just for the ease of reporting, that it's easiest to break it up in that. So it really, what the real answer is, it depends. and the people who are going to know how to provide that information is the superintendent and his team. And you also have some goals, like you have a couple of goal progress measures that are specific to the NES campuses.
I was just about to say that. And also, one of the key strategies for improving our lowest performing schools and meeting the goals and constraints is an NES model. And so I think reporting out on that is also important, as well as district-wide data and non-NES data.
Yeah, and so I have, I've got some districts in Texas that will add, so they don't report all of the campus-specific data, but they do provide a list of where each campus, like of campus performance, that they don't discuss in progress monitoring, but it's provided just so that the board can look at that information. Now, it is really, really important that the board not get into deliberating campus-specific performance. That can actually have a really detrimental impact on your district's culture. If you're talking about how campus A is performing so great and campus B is performing really poorly, what is that going to do for your district? Not just for those two campuses, but for all of the other campuses as well. All right. Before I move on, any other questions about superintendent? All right, let's get into what we came here for. What is effective board participation? How do boards effectively prepare for monitoring conversations and participate in effective monitoring conversations? The first, probably most important piece of this is you got to do your homework. You have to read the report before you get to the meeting. If you're not reading the report before you get to the meeting, you're going to show up and you're not going to be able to have an effective conversation. And it will be noticeable. It will be noticeable to your superintendent and to your colleagues. And at the point where one person decides to not prepare, then they are giving permission to every other person on that dais to not prepare. The way that I engage in the work is how I'm permitting everyone else to engage in the work as well. And so we don't just say read your report, but also we want you to ask technical and tactical questions before the meeting, and saving questions that are more strategic during the meeting. So what do I mean when I talk about technical and tactical? So first of all, there is a document in your packets it's titled Technical, Tactical, and Strategic. And this was not, so I actually shared the wrong link, so you got like a spreadsheet that was supposed to be this. So you haven't had this one for pre-reading, but we did make sure to include it so that you all can read it moving forward, and we'll also post it online with the additional information. And so technical is the technical questions are going to be questions understanding to try to understand what the data says. So give me like all of these technical answers that talk about what it's saying, who's reporting what. You just need to ask those questions beforehand. And it's not because we don't want you to ask those questions in public. It's just not the best way to spend your time in public. Getting those questions out of the way, and then the responses to those questions get posted with the agenda 3 days before the meeting, so that way everyone in the community can also see the responses to those technical and tactical questions. Audrey.
I'm going to ask an obvious question, but it would be great if less technical and tactical questions had to be asked, right? Which goes to what the superintendent prepares for us.
Yeah.
In the outset. Okay.
Yeah. And so those are technical questions. Tactical questions are more specific to how things are done. So questions trying to understand like how the assessment was administered, who was assessed, anything that's really like about the strategy for how the data was collected. And that can also relate, extend to more tactical, operational type tactical questions. And so again, it's not that those aren't important questions. It's just that that's not the best way to spend your precious few moments in in a meeting where you have your community here and you want to make sure that everyone is engaged and really understanding the data and the strategies to move forward. So we want you to ask those technical and tactical questions in advance. The answers to those get posted with the agenda before the meeting. And then we also want you to prepare 3 or 4 strategic questions. So these are really questions that are trying to understanding performance, understanding what was learned, understanding what the superintendent knows about the root cause, and then understanding how that knowledge is going to help us improve. Angela.
Do we submit those questions so that the team knows ahead of time so that they better prepare or not?
That's a great question. You don't have to. You don't have to. So you absolutely can, but you don't have to. And because those are the questions that you're going to be asking during the meeting. So ideally, if you're keeping your questions specific to the strategic questions, then that's what the superintendent will be prepared for. And on that same note, keep in mind that your superintendent is the strategic leader of the district. That he has to know all of the strategies, how we're employing all of the different things. He owns the strategic plan. All of the technical pieces, he has a lot of really smart people to help him with that. But those people aren't necessarily going to be by his side during a progress monitoring session. Sometimes they will be, but not always, and not always all of them. And so if you really are sticking to strategic questions during progress monitoring, then you are sticking to the things that the superintendent will know the most about. Did you have a question, or are you just leaning forward? Okay. So that's do your homework. The next piece, understand reality. So again, the advice for the superintendent was to not be defensive. For the board, it really is important to focus on understanding the reality. Sometimes data is going to be disappointing, but it's really, really important that everyone understands that the data is not just numbers on a page. That data, it's students, and it is the reality for those students, and it's the reality that they are living right now. And so getting upset or emotional or weaponizing the data is not going to help those students improve. It's not going to help improve the conditions that they are facing. And so it is critical that the board be focused on understanding what that reality is for students rather than judging that reality. I mean, you can definitely judge it. You're going to judge it. You can't help that. But it's acting on that judgment is when it becomes difficult. And really, it's not just the act of judging, oh, I hate this data, but becoming so upset about the data that you start to beat up on staff. Earlier I mentioned that what happens in the boardroom will be seen in the classroom. If the way that the board is interacting with staff and with the superintendent around data, you can expect that if you are beating him up in a progress monitoring session, then he is likely to go and say, staff, what the hell, man? Why did y'all set me up for this? And it's going to snowball. And eventually, that's going to land on your kids. And that's not okay. And that's the thing that you have to remember. Okay. So we're going to understand reality. How are we going to keep the conversation going? This is what we were talking about earlier. So working with the superintendent before the meeting to make sure that the reports are complete before the meeting. Making sure that all of the elements are there and that the understanding of root cause is clear. Having that conversation beforehand is so much better than having to table it and come back later on. But even when you have to table, it just doesn't, you don't get there all the way. The strategies aren't clear, the root cause isn't clear. Keeping the conversation going by tabling it and saying, bring it back next month, is so much better, and I can't stress it enough, than voting to not accept the report. No gotcha governance. What do you think I mean when I say gotcha governance?
Don't ask for stuff that's not on the calendar.
Don't ask for stuff that's not on the calendar. You don't want to surprise your superintendent by saying, well, why didn't you give us this thing that I didn't actually say that I wanted beforehand? The calendar exists for a reason. That's how you set expectations. We tell the superintendent not to surprise the board. In the same way, we don't want the board to be surprising the superintendent. This has to be collaborative. And then finally, to Mr. Miles' earlier point, don't offer advice. Monitoring sessions are conversations between the board and the superintendent. It's your opportunity and the community's opportunity to understand the reality for students. It is not ever an opportunity to tell the superintendent what he needs to be doing, to select the inputs, to critique those strategies, or to be satisfied with the information that you're looking at. What questions do you have about board engagement, board participation in a monitoring session?
I'll speak for myself. I'm sure if I am out of order, I am not doing it on purpose. So even if I sat in this room and heard this, if I'm the one doing it, I'm probably not self-aware enough to know I'm doing it.
Yeah.
So what is the protocol, or who deals with that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And board chair.
Delegate, no. Rick will take you out back.
Yeah, so when the board chair gets elected, we give them this nifty little thing called a gavel. They are expected to use it. When they use it, it should not be perceived by the person who is getting the gavel banged that is them beating them up. They're not going to be beating you to death with the gavel, but just a gentle like, hey, remember what we're here for. Or a simple reminder that, hey, just a reminder that this is what we're here for. Or, that question is really off bounds, so can you rephrase it? And we'll talk about the way to, some tips to help you ask the most effective questions in just a minute. But the board chair definitely is the person with the authority to say, in the moment, let's keep this on track. There are other ways that boards do it as well. Sometimes boards will say, instead of the board chair leading the progress monitoring conversation, a lot of boards will actually rotate that responsibility. So maybe Rick is the first person who leads the monitoring conversation, and then calls on people and keeps them in line. And generally, as a coach, what I do is, so I have an evaluation form. It's the spreadsheet that was shared with you all. I usually keep that in a Google Doc, and I'm watching along as the monitoring conversation is happening, typing away on my little laptop. And as y'all are talking, I'm writing down your questions. And when I hear something kind of go off the deep end, or go out of bounds, then I'll say, like, hey, check that person, or reel them in, or like I'll give them some kind of nudge, like here's an opportunity to get them to refocus the conversation. There are lots of different ways that your board can choose to engage in that improvement process. You just have to figure out what works best for you.
Can I say one thing about the selection of inputs, this offering of advice and strategy, which we were talking about earlier? I think, maybe you're going to get here, but one of the reasons why we do not select the inputs is because we do want to hold our superintendent accountable. And if we tell him what to do, then we are incapable of doing that, because then it's our fault that something went the wrong way. We have to rely on his decision-making, and then we can adequately determine whether or not we're living up to what we expect, so.
Yeah. If you were telling the superintendent what strategies to use, you were giving him a reason to fail. You were handing him the excuse to use when evaluation time comes along. What other questions do you have about effective board member participation? All right.
I was going to say, to Angie's point, I think we'll learn as we go. And so hold me accountable. I'll say that, hold me accountable, because you guys know I have questions. So.
Well, I was going to say, too, along those lines, we have a coach that will be more than happy to review our 3 to 4 smart questions before we enter the meeting as well.
Absolutely. And to that point, so the first couple of times you do progress monitoring, I will ask you specifically, so I will ask you all, I'll send an email and say, just making sure everyone has read the report by this date. Please send me one strategic question. And then we can talk through that. We can also set up a Zoom call, a one-on-one coaching session where we can think through questions if you're really struggling with it. That's what y'all are paying me to be here for. So I'm always happy to do that. Also, the first couple of monitoring, like the first few progress monitoring sessions you have, we will call those practice sessions, and I will be with you as your coach, if not here in person, here via Zoom, or we can figure out what works best for you all to do that. But give the report. I essentially hold your hand and walk you through that. And so if Audrey asks the question before the superintendent responds, I say, okay, let's look at this question. Was it smart? And we do that for every single person so that it's not, nobody feels called out, and that everybody has that opportunity to practice correcting their questions in the moment. Okay, so let's talk about what a SMART question is. So we don't just say okay, you need to ask the right questions, figure it out. We actually give you a framework for how to do that. So SMART questions are going to be strategy focused, they're going to be measure focused, they're going to be ask oriented, results focused, and time bound. What does that mean? So strategy focused, does the question focus on understanding the reality for students? The superintendent's understanding of what that reality is or what's driving that reality and how that understanding is influencing his strategies. Or is it technical or tactical? You want your questions in the meeting to be strategic. The next piece is it measure focused? And what that really means is this question asking about something that's in the report, or is it asking about something that somebody told me in the grocery store line or during school pickup, or some other data, a study that I read somewhere else? Or you really have to keep your conversation focused to what's being reported in the actual report for that month. Ask oriented. It seems pretty straightforward, but you would be surprised. You should be asking open-ended questions, not yes/no questions or multiple choice questions. Generally, when questions are yes, no, or multiple choice, you're really giving your opinion. So, superintendent, when are you going to implement that strategy that I told you about last week, or are you going to implement that strategy on Thursday, Friday, or Saturday? You really want to keep them open-ended because you want to hear as much of you want to hear from the superintendent to talk about his strategies with as much flexibility and freedom as he can, because that's how you're going to have that more well-rounded conversation. Also, the question should be results focused. That's really, is this question a good faith effort to really understand performance, or am I really just giving my opinion but phrasing it as a question? That kind of speaks to the previous one, but you can still do it the other way around. You can ask an open-ended question that really is just sharing your opinion. I actually was just evaluating another board, and the one board member goes on and on and on and on and on, talking about the story of a class that she was in and all of the things that she learned and all of the things that she knew. And then at the end, she goes, right? Technically, that's open-ended. I mean, I guess it also could be yes, no, but that's not a question, it's an opinion. And then finally, time-bound. And Angela, Mrs. Lamont Flowers, getting to your earlier point, we want the majority of the questions to be focused on the past. What is our understanding of the performance that has already happened? You can't monitor the future unless you have a crystal ball. And to my knowledge, we haven't invented that technology yet. So you really need the majority of your questions to be focused on the past, not on the future. Only after you have a thorough understanding of what has happened, then you can shift the conversation to talk about what is coming up. What are the strategies to move forward? What questions do you have about SMART questions? They do not have to be SMART in form right now.
About being time-bound and looking at current and past actions, so at what point do we have the strategic conversations around if we're not meeting target, like the action plan, and how it will influence increases in achievement and things like that? So at what point are those questions and conversations had?
So I generally, so there's no perfect science to it, but generally the first 3/4 or 2/3 of your monitoring conversation should be focused on the past, and then that last quarter, last third can be focused on the future. And so you want to do the past first, and then only after that, then go to the future.
Is the goal for us to have the superintendent articulate a deep analysis of what's happening? Is it like, if we understand it, at what point are we doing it to, I'm just trying to figure out, if we understand it, is it like we understand it and we move forward, or is this a part of helping the community to understand the strategy?
Yeah, so that's actually a perfect question. Because progress monitoring isn't just for the board to understand. It really is for the community to understand. And so you have to, and this does require practice to get really good at, but getting to that point where I can ask myself so I know I have a thorough understanding of this now. Is it also clear for the community, or should it be clear for the community? And as long as you're asking that question, then chances are that that's what you're calibrating for. At the point where you catch yourself no longer thinking about it, that's where you should probably say oh, maybe I need to lean into this a little bit more.
So, as a large urban district, I find one of the greatest challenges for people is that the distance between district and school and their student. Mm-hmm. And so helping them to sometimes understand, yes, I care deeply about each of the children. But then when we're doing this board work of governance, it's at a much higher level.
Yeah.
I wonder how we help stay connected to the front line, if you will.
Yeah, and that's also a great question. So as a board, you have to keep, your perspective has to remain high level, district-wide. But also keeping in mind that every single data point you're looking at is representative of children, of a child. And I think that having that understanding as you move through, and keeping that mindset is really that's the starting point. Refining that perspective is something that you have to work on individually, and that you have to practice on individually. We actually have another district. It's not a Texas district, but they are over 100,000 students that has been going through this process of implementing a similar framework. And I would happily, I think I may have already introduced you to some of their board members, but I would be happy to make some connections and introduce you to those people so that you can have kind of talk to them about some of the things that they have gone through. And that is a board that I would be perfectly willing to do because they are a highly effective board. Mr. Miles.
I think that's a great question also, and I think there'll be a lot of nuance because there are 273 schools, and the data we report is, district-wide data or group-wide data. There will be a school out there that breaks that mold, and the third grade reading scores, let's say, or NWA are going up. This is the average, and then you have a school over here, or the third grade reading scores are going down, but you have these schools over here, and there'll be a tendency to want to try to look at strategy by anecdote, by one or two or three or four schools, and that's not a strategy we can report. We could report all day on the individual supports for individual schools, but I don't think that's what we want to do with goal progress measures, right? I mean,
yeah, and because that can also lead you. So getting into campus-specific performance really can lead you down a rabbit hole. Yeah. Also, suggesting that what happens. So, and this is a common thing actually. So when we look at bright spots, and there's always well, how can we look at bright spots and think of scaling that work? Not everything is scalable. We would love to be able to clone some of our educators. We would love to be, we love the idea of being able to, really ramp up the superstars that are on our campus. But that actually is a losing strategy. And what it does is it suggests that the people who are on campuses that are not performing are not worthy of being cloned, and that's not the case. They are, your educators are dealing with a lot of different conditions, and rather than trying to copy what's happening really well on one district or on one campus and putting it on another campus, you have to look at the conditions that are happening on those campuses and the people who are there, and looking at the things that are hard for them, and lean into that understanding and improving campus by campus. That's not possible for the school board to do. I would even argue that that's not possible for Mr. Miles to do for a district the size of Houston. A district the size of next door to me, Crowley or Everman ISD, those are tiny little districts that they could easily do that. That's why you have executive directors. That's why you have area superintendents. That's really what they have to be focused on. Angela.
I think, though, if we see huge craterous dips places, I do expect Superintendent Miles to notice and have a strategy on it, and to tell us, so we don't have to say, hey, what's everybody saying about blah, blah, blah. So how do we set that expectation?
So again, you have to be careful about calling specific campuses out in the meeting. And so, if campus X is not doing well, how are we going to fix it?
I guess I'm asking, what is the appropriate, maybe it's your question, Superintendent Miles, how do we, and I'm not necessarily even saying it's by campus, say it's something happens in a neighborhood, or it's a certain demographic of whatever.
And that's more appropriate. That's what are the strategies that are working really well for this group or this region?
Yeah, I mean, there's 273. Obviously, if there's a huge outlier, we probably should address it, or groups of kids or groups of campuses. But I would say that it's not appropriate for individual schools because we would be here all day. We have division soups, we have EDs, so that they can apply an individual strategy or adjust the strategy for the context. Every single school has a context that's different. That's what you were trying to say earlier. Has a different context, and so every single school needs a slightly different strategy. Now, it has to be there has to be things we can do district-wide or NES-wide or something like that, and that I think we need to report out. And if there's something really blowing up over here, yes. But to say, well, this one school, a group of teachers are mad about this score, or over here, a group of parents are mad about this score, and it's like, well, you know, there's 273 different schools that they're not going to have the same outcome.
Can I ask a question? So I think I know that I saw this, but tell me if I'm right, or tell me if it's operations and like I'm not out of governance. Don't you have metrics for your leadership team, I guess, by area? So it's somebody's job that's accountable to have a strategy for the whatever crater thing? Am I correct that their things are tied to metrics like that? So that would be the person invested in, is that our system now?
That's right. So the goals that we set, both for performance outcomes and inputs, like improving the quality of instruction for adults, every division soup has them. They flow to their executive directors, and they flow to principals. There are district-wide ones, and then there are division action plans, because everybody's a little bit different and needs a little bit different strategy. So the answer is yes.
So that's how I can be confident in knowing it's not my business to know blah, 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 because that ED, it's their job and they're accountable, so they are incentivized to deal with it.
That's correct. And one other thing that you'll see very clearly, especially this coming in the next couple months, we will have a district action plan with indicators of success. Obviously, it includes the goals and constraints, but we have more focused steps that we have to take in order to accomplish those goals and constraints. And so those then, the division soups take that the action plan, they make theirs based off of that. EDs then make theirs, and principals make theirs off of that. So by the end of March, you will have every school's action plan and indicator of success, partly tied to the division actions, but also unique to their own campus. Because one campus might have, an action step related on a reading curriculum, if they're not NES, that a lot of other campuses didn't have. So you see, that's a very specific thing for that one campus. And so I think you can be assured by, and you'll have access, of course, to all the action plans, but you can be assured that everybody's looking campus by campus at the needs assessments for that campus.
Thank you for that.
All right. Finally, what do we do after progress monitoring? So once the board has completed, after the board has completed the monitoring conversation, it must consider 3 questions. Does reality match the vision? Are we on track with our targets? Is there growth toward the vision? Or if we aren't on track, does the superintendent understand why? And is there a strategy and plan that is sufficient to cause growth toward the vision? This isn't a question about whether or not we agree with the plan. The question is simply, can a reasonable person expect that the plan as laid out will get us back on track? Upon considering these questions, the board must vote to accept, table, or reject the monitoring report. Voting to reject a monitoring report should be a last case scenario. What questions do you have about the decision to vote, to table, or thank you so much, or to accept, table, or reject the monitoring report? All right. So if there are no questions, then the final piece is after monitoring. So if the answer to all three of these is yes, then definitely accept the report. If it's yes to only one or two, then you may accept the report. If the board is sufficiently happy with the conversation and with the superintendent's performance, then you can accept it. Or if you are, if you want additional answers, if you want additional feedback, if you want additional description, then you can table it and ask him to bring it back next month. In the next month, you will probably put it on the consent calendar to be approved, but it will come to the board so that it can be read and they can ask questions between or before the meeting, with those answers to be posted with the agenda. If it is no to all three, the board should consider voting to not accept the report. And that really, again, you don't have to vote to not accept it. You can also vote to table it. And the main, absolutely most important thing is not, does reality match the vision? And the superintendent doesn't even have to fully understand the root cause. And in the earlier day, like in the earlier phase of your goals, like right now, the understanding is going to be lesser than it will be 2 years or 3 years from now. Really the important thing is there a plan to get us back on track? Can I articulate how we're gonna get us back there? Angela.
Because of the unique situation with all the change, how far backwards do we expect to go, Superintendent Miles, or which metrics are the ones that you say, well, this is stable? And so that we don't get into that, like, well, that was before my time. Like, how do we do that?
And Ashley, tell me if I'm on track, but our job is also to report the information from the past. Even if we don't do NWA, we can talk about what the STAR data is from the past, and then we can convert our NWA to STAR. So in some way, try to have some sort of comparison. And even if we don't have a conversion factor, we can report this is where we are in the proficiency of our kids as noted by STAR. Here's the baseline for NWA, and based on this is the proficiency of our kids using the new metric. But at least it'll give some level of comparison between the past and now. Does that make sense?
Yep. And so we think in terms of like, we're all working on this together. We're all learning together. We're going to have more grace in the beginning. And so definitely, so our recommendation is for the first year of implementation, it is really going to be an alignment year. You can't, and that's also the strategy that you all have adopted through your targets and saying we understand that this first year we are really building systems, we're building culture, we are preparing the soil, and then that next year, that's when we're going to be able to start having those more robust conversations, and accountability will start to ramp up. And then by year 3, you really should start seeing some direct alignment. And I would expect to see some really strong results in that third year.
Is there the option below accept where we discuss that maybe we'd like to see more X, Y, and Z in the next report, and we're not doing anything official about redoing what we're doing in the moment?
I think those are probably, so yes, I think those are probably more efficient conversations to be had offline, just one-on-one with the superintendent, or maybe with the officers and the superintendent.
And,
Yes,
and just one word of caution, just from my past experience. Sometimes the board send it back until they get the right answer, the right strategy.
Yeah.
You know, so you just have to be careful. But the budgets are that way too. It's like,
Yep.
you know, I don't see my project in there, so I'm sending the budget back until I see my project. So.
Yep. All right. So after you voted to accept the report, it is appropriate but not necessary to have a conversation about whether or not the goals are still relevant. Is this still the best thing for us to be monitoring? Is this still the direction that we want to go? Is this still working for our district? You're probably not going to have that conversation for the first couple of years. But definitely after the first year, you may want to have a conversation about, are these targets still working, and looking at the numbers, especially with your MAP data, because this is a baseline year. I would definitely expect for that conversation to come up a year from now. But you don't have to have that conversation. It really is the will of the board. Gold monitoring is always going to be most effective when you're not making changes, when you are sticking with the strategies and moving forward and letting them work. And it takes time to make that happen. And so, but that doesn't mean that you also stick with something that's just not working. So that's a conversation that's allowed. Generally not for the first year. Generally for the first year, you want to let it go. And the best time to have those conversations is kind of toward the end of the year, before the superintendent's evaluation. So with that, what questions do you all have about after the report, recalibrating the goals, reconsidering the goals, or progress monitoring in general? All right, if there are no questions, then this training is complete.
I would like to acknowledge for the minutes that Ms. Mendoza joined the meeting at 5:49 p.m. With no further business to discuss, the meeting of the board is adjourned at 7:52 p.m. on December 7th, 2023. Thank you.